With yesterday's military actions, our message was crystal clear. The United States of America will not allow the Assad regime to continue to use chemical weapons. Last night, we obliterated the major research facility that it used to assemble weapons of mass murder. I spoke to the president this morning, and he said if the Syrian regime uses this poisonous gas again, the United States is locked and loaded. When our president draws a red line, our president enforces the red line. The United States is deeply grateful to the United Kingdom and France for its part in the coalition to defend the prohibition of chemical weapons. We worked in lockstep. We were in complete agreement. Last night, our great friends and indispensable allies shouldered a burden that benefits all of us.
That was Ambassador Nikki Haley. Boy, of all the appointments that President Trump has made, she might be the star. I'm not sure, but Nikki is just Ambassador Haley, shall I say, has been a bulldog. She reminds me of Clare Lopez. Help me. Who was the ambassador to the UN that was such a bulldog? A woman in the 60s, 70s.
Oh, Jean Kirkpatrick, maybe, huh?
Yes, Jean Kirkpatrick. I think she's channeling Jean Kirkpatrick, which is just amazing. Anyway, Claire, thanks for joining us. Claire is the Vice President for Research and Analysis at the Center for Security Policy. And Claire, you know a lot about what's going on in Syria. You've been saying for months, you've said on this show, maybe even over a year, that we should bomb Syria's chemical weapons plant, not civilians, but the plants, and destroy their capabilities. So what actually did we take out on Friday night?
Well, there were three primary targets, as I understand it, that were targeted by the United States, Britain, and France. And they were two military bases, but the primary target, according to General Dunford, speaking for the Joint Chiefs of Staff on Friday night, the primary target was a place called the Scientific Studies and Research Center, SSRC, a kind of a campus of buildings and labs outside of Damascus, which was the primary hub for R&D on both chemical and biological weapons for the Syrian regime. And there, Iranian scientists, North Korean, Russian, and Syrian, and I suspect probably Hezbollah too, were engaged in R&D on the most horrific chemical and biological weapons agents known to man. That is the place that I've been calling for a very long time, just as you say, Sandy, for a long time to be wiped off the face of the map. The facility in the after photos looks that it has been pretty well destroyed. As I understand it, upwards of 70 missiles hit that facility on Friday night.
You know, it's interesting because CNBC has a story, and this is the title, Claire. It says, why the U.S. claims of demolishing Syria's chemical weapons capabilities may be pure PR. And they go back and they interview former Pentagon officials. And they say that, first of all, there's no way you could tell what was done. It's an overstatement, the damage that we did, et cetera, et cetera. I just wondered what you think about that.
Well, certainly we have not obliterated the entire capability of the Damascus regime to conduct R&D to produce or deploy chemical or biological weapons. Certainly there are other facilities, protected facilities, underground facilities. There are stockpiles of munitions loaded with this stuff in other places. That's all true, certainly. But because the SSRC was the hub of the R&D effort, built in 1971, goes back that far, and it was the place where all these other regimes, people have to understand, the Iranians, the North Koreans, and the Russians were all there helping Syria. It not only took out a very important capability in terms of R&D for these heinous programs, BW and CW, but sent a message to those other rogue regimes as well, that violations, and here's the important part, violations of the Chemical Weapons Convention, there's a Biological Weapons Convention too, but in this case, CWC, and the OPCW, Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, violations will not be tolerated. This is not stepping into the internecine Syrian civil war. This is not taking sides. This is not an attempt to oust Bashar al-Assad. This is the enforcement as a member signatory state to the outline of chemical weapons as, like biological weapons, uniquely heinous, and we cannot permit their development or their use. That's what this was about. It was a very significant blow. Don't mean to say that the entire capability is gone. It's certainly not. But this was the hub. This was the center of operations.
Well, and spoke volumes to North Korea, to Iran, and to Russia as well, too, Claire, about what this president's willing to do. And, that's worth gold right there. And to be able to do this without, as far as we can tell, without the loss of civilian life is pretty amazing, don't you think?
Well, that was the point. It was very specifically targeted, as I said, against this facility and 2 other military bases. And as I understand it, there was communication between the White House and Moscow before the strike. Now, I don't know if the entire complex at the SSRC was evacuated ahead of the strike. If it was not, and if there were some rogue Iranian, Hezbollah, North Korean, or Russian scientists still there working on this awful stuff. By the way, what I'm talking about is weaponized strains, maybe genetically modified strains of anthrax, Ebola, cholera, plague, smallpox on the BW side, and horrific advanced nerve agents like sarin and like VX, one single drop of which sends a person, a little baby, into paroxysms of muscle twitching and death. That's what they were working on. If some of those scientists were still at that place when the missiles came in, well, too bad.
Claire, we've talked quite a bit, I think, we did quite a bit when President Obama was in office and this whole issue of Syria and chemical weapons came up. And there were, this is just my view of it, there were real doubts initially when there was some chemical weapon strikes, I think 5 years ago, about whether this was Bashar al-Assad, whether it was the Islamists faking attacks and faking some of this stuff. And so, look, I don't know how you felt about this because I honestly can't remember, but I just remember there was less than enthusiasm about Barack Obama going in and hitting Bashar al-Assad because we weren't clear who was doing what. But somehow things have changed. So clarify that for me if you could.
Sure. Well, to begin with, certain capabilities reside with nation states and other capabilities may be more widespread. So if you're talking about an advanced nerve gas like sarin or VX, that is a nation-state capability. Subnational Islamic terror groups do not have that capability. The second thing to know is that in the Syrian battlefield space right now, the only parties with air capability, air assets, be it planes, drones, or helicopters, are state actors. The rebels do not have air capability. We have not seen the others in the theater, that is, the Iranians, the Turks, or the Russians, using air assets to deliver chemical weapons. They've not done that. Only Damascus has done that. And so when you have reports, credible, of air assets, helicopters or planes in this case, dropping these barrel bombs and other munitions on civilian areas containing chemical weapons, either chlorine, which is more widely available, or sarin, that's the regime, and there's nobody else doing that. There's nobody else that has that capability. Now, the other thing to know is that air flights, airplane routes are tracked by any number of intelligence services, anything in the air that flies in the Syrian battlefield is tracked. And so not just the planes themselves and their routes being tracked, but the communications between those planes and their bases are being recorded and tracked. And so it's pretty well known when a Syrian air asset takes off from a Syrian air base and then shows up over some civilian area and drops chemical weapons. There's just simply no question about that. Now, if you're talking about something that is deployed on the ground, we do know that opposing rebel militias have gotten their hands on chlorine and used that multiple times. It's an industrial chemical, widely used, many different applications, from cleaning products to swimming pools. It's widely available, and rebel militias have used chlorine, as well as Damascus.
Okay, so that sort of explains things a little bit. The rebels that are being attacked or targeted by Assad, are they Islamists? Who are these rebels that are still fighting him?
I would never use the word Islamist. It's a euphemism. There's no such thing as Islamism or Islamist. There is Islam, and those who are faithful to it, those who obey Sharia, are called Muslims. But the rebels, primarily in opposition to Bashar al-Assad's horrific human rights abusing rule in Damascus, span the gamut. You've got very strong militias like the Al-Qaeda affiliates that have undergone several name changes, but now mostly are known as Hayat Tahrir al-Sham. You've got militias supported by Turkey, for example, Ahrar al-Sham and others. You've got the remnants of the Islamic State still there, still around, and myriad other subgroups and militias. A lot of them are aligned with the Muslim Brotherhood. A lot of them are aligned, as I said, with Al-Qaeda, the Islamic State. And so they're all jihadis. The whole lot of them are jihadis.
And that's why Erdogan was so happy about this strike then. That makes sense to me.
Well, Erdogan has a particular, and I think rising aggressive agenda, both in the Syrian battle space and more broadly regionally. But his number one objective is to attack the Kurds and ensure that they do not form any kind of an entity autonomous zone or state of their own. But he also has flip-flopped during the course of these last 5 years, originally calling for the overthrow of Bashar al-Assad, then for a time not calling for the overthrow of Bashar al-Assad, but primarily the regime of Recep Tayyip Erdogan in Ankara is a rising neo-Ottoman jihad regime whose primary objective in that battle space is the Kurds. If I couldn't put a quick plug in real fast here, the Center for Security Policy will be publishing a book later this week. It is called Ally No More, and it is about Turkey. It is comprised of chapters by 10 different authors. Stay tuned for that at centerforsecuritypolicy.org.
Okay, great. Thanks for that, Claire. Trying to talk and think too quickly. We'll put that on our Facebook page when it comes out and do an interview on that. Thanks for that tip. We just have a couple of minutes left. I have to ask you what your personal assessment is of the difference having John Bolton as National Security Advisor as opposed to H.R. McMaster.
Oh, night and day. We at the Center have long been championing the appointment of Ambassador John Bolton to the National Security Council. We couldn't be more pleased that President Trump has now named him to be the new National Security Advisor. He is already beginning to clean house of so many of the Obama-era holdovers. We're looking forward to supporting him and working with him in any way that we possibly can, and think that this is just a change much for the better.
You know, I have to say, Claire, this is one of the big hits against John Bolton is that he hangs out with people like the icky Center for Security Policy people, which of course makes me laugh and makes me very happy. But there is a big change at the White House, thank God, because these are crucial times. And so as you look, we have a minute left, as you look at how less than a minute, 30 seconds, President Trump's, let's do this, scorecard on how he's been handling national security. How about that as our closing statement here?
Well, I think that he has proven himself very adept. He came in without government experience, without foreign policy experience. It's taken a while. We're seeing very important and key changes. I think the actions in Syria are testament to that. Some of the new appointments, and as well, Mike Pompeo being appointed new Secretary of State. His hearing was last week. These are all positive and good changes. We think that the president is on the right track.
I do too, and what a relief. We've worried for months, really, as we've seen things unfold and bad advisors in the White House, so thank God for all of this. Clare Lopez, Center for Security Policy. Thank you, Clare. We'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, Sandy.